There's a photograph of Rome from 1857. In it stands an apartment block that, on paper, wasn't built until 60 years later. Same design, same shutters, same red roof. Photographed decades before its own birthday. I've been walking through Rome lately, and I couldn't shake one strange feeling. The city doesn't feel like it grew slowly, street by street, over 3,000 years. It feels like it arrived, almost all at once, in one piece. We line up to photograph the handful of buildings stamped ancient. Nobody stops to ask who built the thousands of ordinary apartment blocks standing all around them, or exactly when. Rome is 100 square miles of these massive stone rectangles. We marvel at 3 pyramids at Giza and somehow walk right past millions of carved blocks stretching across Europe. And when you finally go looking for the simple answer, who built the ordinary city and when, something odd happens. The construction plans are thin, the photographs of the work barely exist, and the pictures that do survive keep showing Rome already finished, long before the dates in the books say it should be. Quick pause, and a real thank you. If you've walked these streets with me before, it means a lot that you came back. If you're new, a like or a subscribe honestly helps a small channel like this keep going. And to be straight with you, everything here is just the best I've managed to piece together. It's not the final word. If it clashes with what you already know, no hard feelings. Hold both and decide for yourself. Start with the roofs. Red roofs everywhere, not only in Rome, but across old maps of towns all over the world. There are 100 colors you could choose, and yet the world seems to have settled on red with a little blue thrown in. Some say the red marked the earth, the lower realm, while blue was kept for the sky and for royalty. Whatever the reason, that same red-roofed shuttered apartment block turns up in Rome far earlier than it's meant to. The record dates whole neighborhoods, Prati, Testaccio, Barioli, to the 1870s and after, and gives the whole burst a grand name, the Second Industrial Revolution. A tidy story. But look at a painting of Rome from 1834 and the same blocks are already standing. Look at a photograph from 1857 and there they are again. Go back to an engraving from 1683, more than 300 years ago, and Rome already has its big square apartment blocks. Go back further into views from the 1600s and 1700s, and the same red-roofed city is waiting for you. Obelisks already raised, streets already lined. At every spot where an 1870s building supposedly went up, there were already older buildings just like it on the very same ground. So which is true? Were they built in the 1870s or were they always there? Take one building people can actually name, the Palazzo degli Ambassadores. The record says it took 12 years to build, from 1915 to 1927. 12 years, and yet the only construction photographs anyone can dig up come from a single short stretch around 1920 and 1921. And in them, the building is already nearly complete. Before that window, nothing. After it, nothing. No steady record of a 12-year job. It doesn't look like a slow build. It looks like a light switching on, incomplete, and then, within months, finished. Look closer at that one surviving construction photo and it gets stranger still. The top edge, right where the towers should rise, dissolves into blur and white nothing. And the trees, the far buildings, and the scaffolding all seem to stop dead at the exact same height, no matter how near or far they are. Now, step back to that photograph from 1857 and one in 1880 when these apartment blocks were supposedly brand new. They don't look new, they look settled, lived in, already old. And for the thousands of ordinary blocks no tourist ever photographs, there are almost no plans, almost no progress photos, almost no film of this vast citywide effort. A missing paper trail proves nothing on its own. But it's a strange thing to keep tripping over. Where are the pictures of Rome actually being built? Here the ground gets stranger. I got curious about what happened to Rome after the empire's so-called glory days, so I went century by century, the year 300, then 400, then 500, all the way to 1100, asking one plain question each time. What happened in the city of Rome in that year? The answer barely moved. In the 300s, Rome was in decline. In the 500s, a shadow of its former self. In the 900s, chaotic and decaying. Every century, the same tune. Decline, decay, a city just barely hanging on. The official timeline reads like a list of disasters. Sacked by the Visigoths, sacked by the Vandals, sacked by the Ostrogoths, plundered by raiders, battered by the Normans. You can read the run of it yourself. A great fire in 64, another in 80, damage in 217, sack after sack after sack, until you start to wonder how anything in Rome is left standing at all. And yet, on the maps that come afterward, the city sits there looking perfectly fine. For 700 or 800 years, almost nothing specific survives, just a long gray fog of not much happened. There's a theory some researchers hold that would explain that fog, that our calendar carries centuries that were never actually lived, phantom years stitched into the timeline, which is why that whole stretch reads so empty and so repetitive. I can't prove that, but it's fair to ask why 1,000 years of one of history's greatest cities reads like the same sentence copied over and over. So I went to the maps. If Rome had truly sat in ruins for 1,000 years and more, the old maps should be crowded with broken monuments. They aren't. On a map of Rome from around 1590, on another from the 1600s by Giovanni Battista Falda, and on one older still from the early 1500s, the ancient ruins we queue up to see today are simply not there. Where the Forum's broken columns should stand, there are neat, tidy fields. And the Colosseum. On these old maps, it isn't a ruin at all. It's whole, full height, unbroken. The gap at the top that every visitor photographs today, it hasn't appeared yet. Look closer at those same maps and you catch something else. Here and there, buildings drawn as if half swallowed by the ground, sunk to their windows in earth, as though the city were rising up out of something or settling back down into it. There's more. Search out paintings of Rome from the 1700s and you find two very different cities. The early ones show Rome grand and complete. The later ones, mostly from the end of the century, show it overgrown with weeds, half neglected, looking less like an eternal city and more like somewhere a war had just passed through. Something, it seems, happened in between. And if the Colosseum stood intact and full height on maps drawn in the 1500s and 1600s, then whatever broke it did not happen 2,000 years ago. It happened after. And that's the thread that pulls it all together. On one end, ordinary buildings that show up in pictures long before the date they were supposedly built. On the other, ancient ruins that don't appear on the old maps at all, and the Colosseum that was still whole when those maps were drawn, then broken sometime later. Put those together, and the neat familiar story starts to wobble at both ends. What if Rome wasn't slowly assembled over 3,000 years and slowly crumbled over 2? What if the city was mostly already there, and whatever ruined its great monuments came far more recently than we've been told, somewhere in those foggy, missing centuries no one can quite account for? A theory says a reset of some kind swept through, and the world quietly rebuilt on top of what was left. It would account for the thin paper trail, the copied out centuries, the ruins that skipped the old maps, and the monuments that were whole in one picture and shattered in the next. I can't tell you that's what happened. I can only tell you that the city's own pictures don't match the city's own story. Strip it all back, and one idea keeps rising to the surface. The buildings, the maps, and the paintings seem to be telling a different age for Rome than the plaque on the wall. Not older, possibly younger, and possibly ruined within living memory rather than ancient legend. I don't have the final answer, and I won't pretend to, so I'll hand it to you. When the stones and the timeline disagree with each other, which one are you going to believe? If this one made you look twice, share it with someone who still trusts the sign on the wall. And go watch my Tartaria series next, because Rome is far from the only place where the map and the timeline flatly refuse to agree.